Hey there, this is Tom with the Diogenes Lamp podcast. I appreciate you listening in, and most importantly, I hope you enjoy what you hear. Before we start with today's episode, I'm going to ask you for a small favor. Believe it or not, history podcasts, especially in their early stages, tend not to be cash cows. Shocker, I know. I too was blindsided by this news. Now, I didn't go into this for the money. I think that much is obvious. But unfortunately, books, research materials, and equipment aren't free. Please, go to patreon.com/Diogenes Lamp Podcast, and for less than the price of a coffee once a month, you can become a member and get access to bonus episodes, recommended reading lists and documentaries, shout-outs, and anything else we'll offer in the future as this project grows. If you are especially broke, hey, I get it, but please, make sure to give us a 5-star review when you listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to the pod on your preferred podcast listening medium. Your support is appreciated, and more importantly, it is needed in order to keep this operation going. On that note, I hope you have a great day, and now back to the show. Born into that regime of robbery, corruption, intellectual darkness, and the distortion of the intellectual life, having as my counselor the corrupt bourgeois civilization, I reached to the point of stealing. Not only that, ask the place of my origin. You'll learn that in my youth I played cards, got drunk, and fired a pistol over trivialities, and at whoever happened to be in the cafes. That was up until 1924, even almost 25, when at last, with the help of communist workers and intellectuals, I began to see not hazy, but with some clarity. Welcome to the Greek Civil War segment of the Diogenes Lamp podcast, episode number 27, Getting to Know Aris Velouchiotis and Napoleon Zervas. That was a nice quote from Thanasis Kalaras, aka Aris Velouchiotis, who is one of the two of the men we're going to be talking about more today, getting to know. The other one, as I'm sure you could have guessed from the title of the episode, being Napoleon Zervas, the main guy who's in charge of Edes. Aris Velouchiotis will play a big role in, kind of be a leader and a captain within Hellas. I thought this episode was important to make. After all, these two guys will play a very big role in our story, and they even hold a place in modern Greek history today, depending who you talk to. Either of these guys will be bandits, thieves, murderers, fascists, communists, whatever title is placed on them. And some of that is more appropriate than other titles. Or they are heroes, patriots, freedom fighters, that kind of thing, right? So let's get into it today. As you guys probably picked up already, it's just me today. Dustin's a little busy. Everyone else I usually have on is busy, and I need to keep giving these episodes to you so you can learn about modern Greek history. So let's get into it and get to know Aris Velouchiotis a little better. And kind of going off what I said earlier, because we're starting with Aris Velouchiotis, I just want to say, again, one man's saint is another man's terrorist. But with that being said, if you read around a little bit, I don't think it's controversial to say that Aris was a bit sadistic and did not have many qualms with making people die in very terrible ways, given that they were deemed to be traitors, of course, per the judgment of Aris. So just keep that in mind. But let's go back to an easier time, a nicer time, when Aris was not Aris, but his actual name was Thanasis. And he was born in August of 1905 in Lamia, which is in central Greece. His father Demetrios was a lawyer, and his mother was a notary. Her last name was Zervas as well. And just for context, notaries in Greece are kind of like a bigger deal than here in the States. kind of like halfway between like a paralegal and stuff like that. By all accounts, he grew up privileged in terms of his socioeconomic class. Also, I'm not sure if you guys picked up from his mother's maiden name, Zervas. Yes, that is the last name as Napoleon, meaning his biggest rival later in his life during the occupation in the Civil War was actually distantly related to him through his mother's side, which is, of course, nuts, right? His brother, Aris's brother, let's call him Thanasis for now, his brother, was a journalist. And at 14 years old, Thanasis was such a bad kid that he was expelled from high school. Apparently, he was expelled due to heavy drinking, gambling, and acts of violence. So, like I said, bad stuff. He was really, really into it. Shortly after getting expelled, he ends up enrolling at the Avarov Agricultural School in Larissa, where he studied until 1922. He was able to grab some jobs as a civil servant in Drama and then Trikala, but in 1924 he moved to Athens, and this is where the now 19-year-old Thanasis Kalaras joined up with the Greek Communist Youth, and then later the KKE, the Communist Party of Greece. In 1925 he was conscripted to the Greek army and showed some competence, and as a result he was promoted to be a corporal within like the artillery division or whatever. I'm not good with military stuff, so the artillery department, let's say. Unfortunately for him, though, his communist worldviews got out, and people found out that he was a communist. And as a result, his superiors demoted him and then transferred him to a punishment unit in Kalpaki, which we know where Kalpaki is. It's where a famous battle will take place there in 1940. We mentioned it a tiny bit in like the couple episodes we had on the Italian invasion of Greece. I think episode 11 or so. It's up on the border with Albania, north of Ioannina. Apparently, from what I've read, this punishment unit in Kalpaki was practically a prison that included very harsh treatment, to say the least. Also keep in mind, this was the same year the Pangalos dictatorship came out. Theodoros Pangalos, right? And as a result, the KKE was outlawed as well, during that dictatorship for the first time. Of course, this won't be the last time the KKE gets outlawed, nor will it be the last time Thanasis will be in prison for his communist views. So Thanasis gets out in 1927, and he makes his way down to Athens, and he really starts to ramp up his communist ways, and he even had an alias that he went by when trying to proselytize future comrades, the name Miserias, which kind of means like the miseries, and according to him, the name was chosen to convey the misery of the people. He takes a big role as editor and contributor to the Rizospastis newspaper, right, the radical communist newspaper, and in 1929 he starts to get involved in party security stuff, doing kind of intelligence work, like organizing escape for communist militants, getting fake identity cards for fellow commies who are on the run from authorities and that kind of stuff, okay? In 1931, he would write in the Neos Rizospastis newspaper, and quote, "If there's a moment in my life to which I return from time to time with deep emotion and immense pride, it is precisely the period when I entered the Communist Party." The title of the article he wrote was, "You Are a Regime of Thieves," end quote. Keep in mind now the period of time we're in, right, just from the past episodes we've covered. Most notably, we have the enactment of the 1929 Idiomon Law, which was passed by the Venizelos regime. I bring that up to hammer the point once again that it was not just the Metaxas government that targeted communists and anarchists and that whole lot. Although, as we know, Metaxas takes it to another level, obviously, right? Leading up to 1936, Thanasis keeps doing commie stuff, dodging the Venizelos authorities, and living the chaos that was Greece in between 1932 to 1936. And in 1936, he is captured and imprisoned with many other communists. First, he's taken to Iaros and then to Aegina, both small islands not too far from Athens. We're familiar with some of the torture techniques and humiliation that went with being in these prison camps. But Thanasis wouldn't give up information on his comrades, nor would he give in to authorities to sign one of those declarations of repentance. But all this changes. Sometime around late 1938, early 1939, he's transferred up to a prison in Kerkyra, also known as Corfu. It's an island up on the border with Albania and northwestern corner of Greece. Here, Thanasis continues to hold out, but his torturers decide to crank up the brutality level to 5,000. And around this time, he is castrated. And no, I'm not using that as a figure of speech. I mean, he was literally castrated. And yeah, it's not like a statement I would make willy-nilly. I know this detail gets overlooked a lot. People don't mention it for a variety of reasons. People from the left don't want to mention it because Aris was a big hero of the left, and it makes it look bad if their biggest hero or one of their big freedom fighters or patriots is castrated. And when I say the left, I mean communist circles, right? And it's just, it's not very pleasing to the ear, so it doesn't get brought up a lot. But yeah, so that's obviously terrible, and that's, something that goes along when you have an authoritarian regime like the 4th of August regime and whatnot. Sometime after this barbaric act, there's some conflicting accounts, but Thanasis will finally sign a declaration of repentance. Some sources state this was an order from Nikos Zachariadis himself. Others that the 4th of August regime had done some of their Maniatakis mind tricks and convinced him that this was the case, that Nikos had told him to sign it when it wasn't. But either way, Thanasis signed a declaration of repentance and he was released in July of 1939. His signing of this declaration of repentance is something that apparently haunted him for the rest of his life, as obviously I'd imagine that whole experience did, right? As we'll see, though, throughout the rest of our story, just because you don't have any balls may not mean you actually don't have any balls. If anything, Aris shows the complete opposite of that. You can say what you want about him, but he was extremely brave and courageous with a lot of the stuff he did. And we'll see that. He definitely had a lot of courage and bravery. And we're going to see that firsthand throughout our story. When war breaks out in late October of 1940, he serves in the artillery regiment. When war breaks out in late October of 1940, he serves in artillery in the 3rd Regiment on the Macedonian front. And as we know, the Germans stormed down through Bulgaria in April of 1941, and the front collapses. Aris quickly made his way back to Athens and immediately started advocating for the establishment of resistance groups up in the mountains. But his comrades, fellow communists, weren't sold on this. After all, the Nazis hadn't declared war on Mother Russia in April of 1941. That wouldn't come until late June of that same year. And when it did come, the rest of the Moscow-minded comrades decided it was time, and just 2-ish months after the invasion of the USSR, is founded in fall of that year. And by May of 1942, Hellas is officially founded, with Thanasis Kalaras as their leader, and it is here, roughly, that Thanasis Kalaras becomes Aris Velouchiotis. Aris, god of war, Velouchiotis from Velouchi, a mountain in the hometown that the revolutionaries fought around, thus tying himself to the revolution and taking a badass name with it, right? Aris. So there you have a brief introduction to the Aris Velouchiotis, famous and infamous. Let's put it that way. On that note, let's rewind the clock back to New Year's Day of 1891 in Arta, a city in northwestern Greece, where Napoleon Zervas was born. This makes Zervas, just as a point of reference, 20-ish years younger than Metaxas and 14 years older than Aris Velouchiotis, just so we have an idea of how these guys stack up with each other and, whatnot. His father, by some accounts, was a shoemaker, and the Zervas name went all the way back to the time of the Greek War of Independence, and more specifically, his family had links to one of the more famous and larger Souliot clans in the region of Epirus. Which, side note, for those that aren't familiar, the Souliotes are the people of Souli. Souli is a region in northwestern Greece inside the administrative region of Epirus. These Souliotes have a reputation for belonging to kind of like a warrior society of sorts, being fiercely independent, and it was really one of the few regions in Greece that held out for a long, long time against the Ottomans, only falling in like 1803-ish. So, they held out a long time. After Zervas finished high school, he enrolled at the Law School of Athens, and when Zervas was not even 19 years old, the famous Woudi coup of 1909 occurred, and like many people at the time, Zervas was drawn towards Venizelism, and the army. He enlisted as a volunteer in July of 1910 and would go on to take part in both Balkan wars as a sergeant. He fought in the Great Battle of Kilkis and was even wounded in the chest. But his chest wound wouldn't stop Zervas from carrying on with what many saw at the time, especially many Venizelists, as the expanding of the Greek state and the fulfilling of the Megali Idea, the grand idea. He continues to get promoted, and when World War I breaks out and the national schism along with it, Zervas was one of the first to rally to Venizelos' side. He would go on to fight the Germano-Bulgarian invaders on the Northern Front in World War I, and he'd go on to be promoted to captain, where he would command the 5th Infantry Regiment. Not only would he receive military awards for valor by Greece, but also by the French due to bravery that he repeatedly showed on the battlefield. After Venizelos was unexpectedly defeated in the November 1920 elections, Zervas, along with many other fanatic Venizelist officers, jumped ship without even submitting his resignation and fled to Constantinople. We had briefly mentioned this group of officers in previous episodes when covering this time frame, but they were all part of what was called this national defense. And at the end of 1922, after Plastiras and Kondylis' revolution, he returned to Greece, and by the end of 1923, he had been promoted to lieutenant colonel. But this time around, he was under the patronage network of Theodoros Pangalos. Again, this is the dictator, military guy. You might remember him for most notably cutting currency in half and policing the lengths of women's skirts. It's at this point where Zervas starts to take a leading role in Pangalos' coup in 1925, and in June of that same year, Pangalos appointed Zervas to the strategic post of the military commandant of Athens. You can see how doing like coup-related things, how this would be an important position that you'd want to have on your side, right? I mean, it's Athens, right? He who controls Athens controls Greece, after all. I think that's a quote as well from Siantos, if I'm not mistaken. But it tends to be the truth in Greek politics. Together with another lieutenant colonel, Vasilios Dertelis, Zervas and Dertelis will play a pivotal role in helping Pangalos stay in power, specifically because they'll be in charge of what are called the Republican battalions, whose barracks were in Abelokoubi, which is like a suburb of Athens, and I might be saying that name wrong, so I do apologize. Together, they will help secure Pangalos' new dictatorship, and Zervas himself even took the lead in suppressing a counter-coup movement in Thessaloniki. But by mid-1926, Zervas apparently started to have doubts about this whole Pangalos regime. After all, it wasn't the most popular of regimes. It had a terrible economic outlook situation. They weren't doing a good job managing economic affairs. There was an unpopular agreement with Serbia that would have given Serbia extensive rights over Thessaloniki. People generally don't like their wives' skirts being policed. Like, that's kind of weird, even for 1926. So by the second half of 1926, Zervas had resigned from his position of Pangalos' aide-de-camp, which is like an assistant position, and he started low-key talking with Venizelist and liberal politicians, kind of saying, hey guys, I'll help you overthrow Pangalos, but I need some amnesty of some sort, But the politicians weren't buying. He couldn't get anyone on his side. Luckily, there was someone who was totally on board to cooperate with Zervas, that being the Thunderbolt Kondylis. We know Kondylis because we talked a lot about him in the primer episodes and a decent amount in the monarchy primer episodes as well. Now, at this point of our story, Kondylis is still a Republican, because remember later in the 1930s, before he dies, he turns into kind of like a monarcho-fascist and helps bring the king in October of 1935. But back to our story and our timeline. Kondylis, the Thunderbolt. Kondylis was totally willing to cooperate with Zervas, given, of course, that power would be passed on to Kondylis in one form or another. So a mutual friend of theirs from their days of desertion in Constantinople back in 1921, Katsotas, helped arrange the meeting and discussion of how things would go down. And as convincing as Kondilis may have made it, there are some reports that the big deciding factor that made Zervas and his buddy Dertelis switch sides was that a certain businessman named Bosodakis gave 7 million drachmas to convince them to switch sides. We also know Bodosakis. He was the guy who was called the Merchant of Death. We mentioned him as well in previous episodes for the role he played in helping to build up Greece's large munitions industry that they used to sell guns and ammo to both sides of the Spanish Civil War and many other places leading up to World War II. Bodosakis was not only a big opponent of Pangalos, as many people were, but he was also financier and supporter of Kondilis. So yeah, these payments helped grease the wheels a little more, let's say, and the wheels that would set in motion, of course, the fall of the Pangalos dictatorship. The funny thing about all this, though, is that Kondilis had already tried to overthrow Pangalos once and failed. And for punishment, he was exiled to Santorini for 2-ish months or so, after he was able to get out by agreeing to some kind of compromise he made with Pangalos. We're not going to get into it. Something involving Pangalos running for president / dictator, yada, yada, yada. Don't worry about that. This time around, though, Kondilis would get the coup attempt right, and on August 21st of 1926, while Pangalos was vacationing on Spetses, Kondilis conducted his counter-coup. Pangalos, getting reports of what was going on, tried to counter the counter-coup by using the navy, but Kondilis had also got some key naval commanders to defect to his side. Like I've said before on this podcast, if you are going to do a coup, it pays big time to have multiple branches of the military on your side. But the big difference maker, of course, was the Republican battalions. The same Republican battalions that helped Pangalos become dictator and solidify his power in the first place would be the same that would guarantee his downfall. The irony, right? And, we've seen this before in history. It's not the first time at all, by any means. As we'll see, though, Zervas really enjoyed playing the game that was Greek politics in the 1920s. So almost immediately after Pangalos is deposed, Zervas starts floating around the idea to the press and to Kondilis of him resigning. Kondilis wasn't buying it, though. Instead, he went ahead and made public statements crediting Zervas and Dertelis with overthrowing the much-disliked Pangalos regime. On the surface, all looked alright between the three military men, but in practice, Kondilis knew that these Republican battalions had really turned into a sort of Praetorian guards, and so Kondilis started drawing up secret plans to crush them in the event they resisted their dissolutions. And if you're familiar with the Janissaries, of course you are, right? And what's called the auspicious event, then you probably see some parallels already. And the auspicious event is a great example of a forced disbandment of a military unit in history. I don't know, it happens 1826, 1828 or something like that. Pretty much the Ottoman Empire forces to disband the Janissaries. The Janissaries resist, and lots of people, mostly Janissaries, die. Which it's always generally a really good thing when Janissaries die, so that's cool. But my point with all this is that people in units that are entrenched and have lots of power usually don't give them up easily, right? So yeah, on the morning of September 9th, 1926, Zervas finds his unit completely encircled, and to his complete surprise as well. And what happens next was just a massacre. Left over around 300 dead and wounded. The Republican battalions were crushed, and Zervas and Dertelis were brought to trial, facing charges of high treason. A big high-profile trial took place a week and a half later in late September, and it had, as you can imagine, a ton of press coverage. Zervas took it on himself to actively participate in his own defense, and apparently it was a very spicy trial. Luckily for Zervas and Dertelis, they were given life imprisonment sentences instead of death sentences, and Kondilis refused to grant them clemency. They ended up staying in prison on Aegina, and they were pardoned in mid-1928. And what do you think Zervas and Tertelis do? Do they lay low? Do they maybe take a small hiatus from the high-powered environment that is Greek politics? Do they just take a nice vacation to Naxos or Paros? Absolutely not. Zervas continues his political machinations, and when 1932 rolls around, he joins a political organization supporting Venizelos and the Liberal Party in the upcoming elections. But instead of waiting to see what this pair of up-to-no-good punks were up to, the authorities don't wait around. They just decide to straight up expel them from Thessaloniki before the elections took place, simply on the grounds that they were a threat to security, which makes sense, right? I mean, everyone knows what these guys are up to at this point. They have a bit of a reputation. The failed 1933 Venizelos coup comes and goes, and when time for the 1935 coup rolls around, Zervas was tasked with mobilizing armored cars to support it. But on the night of the movement, Zervas failed to follow through on his end, and the coup, as we know, ended in catastrophe for the Venizelists. With the rise of Metaxas in the 4th of August regime, Zervas decided to take part in organizing a secret underground Venizelos group whose primary purpose was to topple the 4th of August regime, almost like a forerunner of Edes. And Zervas even had some contact with British agents he was lobbying to stop supporting Metaxas, but of course the British wouldn't stop supporting Metaxas and the king. And all this underground activity attracts the attention of the pitbull Maniadakis and his security apparatus, and Zervas ends up imprisoned on April 14th, 1941, not even 2 weeks before Athens falls to the Nazis. Luckily, Zervas was able to break out thanks to a prison guard who was bribed and falsified Zervas's release documents. And honestly, with that, I think we're good, and I think we're back to where we had left off on the previous episodes. We are now in Axis-occupied Greece, and please join us next time as we continue our journey towards the ongoing resistance and the eventual fallout between these two leaders that we covered today that helps lead to a civil war that will consume Greece. Take care. Bye-bye.